you know.
Actually, for the white
okay, here we go. I think we're live. I think we're moving. Welcome everybody. We're gonna take just a couple of minutes to let this baby populate. But while you're here, we want to welcome you, and we want to say to you that you are a part of the resistance and the revolution in two ways right now. Number one, you're here. You're carving out space to be in this conversation. And secondly, we're going to invite you to click the share button. We believe that this conversation that Ben and Linda are going to have with us about how we show up in the protest as revolutionaries and restorative peacemakers is critical. It has to resound through the streets of our entire country. So do us a favor, click share and let people know that you're over here listening in to Linda Sarsour and Ben McBride teach and train us for the work of protest. I also want to invite you in the comment thread right now, if you can just start to populate that by letting us know where you're calling in from. I'm literally watching folk register for this from all over the world because this is a global reality, right? So let us know, because it's going to be fun to understand who it is that we're talking to. I want to welcome you to this conversation, and I want to pause at the very beginning and say that this is a conversation in memory and in honor of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and William DuBose and David McAtee and Jamal Floyd, who was pepper sprayed to death in his prison cell in Brooklyn yesterday. These are Black lives in a growing constellation of Black souls that have been prematurely extinguished by whiteness. And so we remember them and we say their names and we lament. But here's the thing about lament. Lament doesn't just invite us to linger in sadness. Lament is the space where the high octane fuel of merciful action grows. And so, yes, we would lament, and then we protest until the world is remade. That's why we're having this conversation. So thanks for being a part of it. It's both essential and too late. We've got a problem to fix, and we all have a role to play in it. So for those of you who are joining now, welcome. If you'd put in the comment thread where you're calling in from, that's going to be helpful for us to get a glimpse of that. And click the share button so this message resounds throughout the country right now, as so many of us are figuring out how to actually put some muscle into the protest itself. Let folk know you're listening to Linda Sarsour and Ben McBride teach us about protest. My name is Jer Swigert. I'm the co-founder of Global Immersion. We're a peacemaking training organization that forms everyday peacemakers to join God and one another in remaking the world. We believe that restoration is the mission of God. It's the vocation of humanity. And we think that everyday peacemakers do three things. We see accurately. That means that we see ourselves, we see one another, we see the world, we see the pain and the plight, and we see our contributions to it accurately. We immerse. That means that we step off the road of comfort and into reality, into the epicenter of the pain and the injustice and even the violence, equipped with the tools of compassion and curiosity. We contend. That means that we get creative in love. We get creative in costly and collaborative ways. And we think that as everyday peacemakers learn to see, immerse, and contend, we actually participate in the restorative revolution that's already underway. In conversations like these, whether on our webinars or in Facebook Live, we're simply examining current events through the lenses of everyday peacemaking so that we can become substantively different kinds of people. That means that this conversation that we're about to have is not just about education, it's about transformation. And so we urge you to listen in with that in mind. For those of you who are joining now, welcome. Let us know where you're calling in from and click the share so that this conversation resounds throughout the country. We want the comment space throughout this conversation to be a space where you can connect with one another. You can ask questions. You can post resources. Please post helpful resources and ones that are not self-promotional. And I want to let you know that I've got a teammate who's watching and curating our comment section. Curiosity is very much so allowed in this conversation. Accusation is not. And so if we see that happening, we will conclude your access to this conversation. This needs to be a brave space. And so we encourage all of us to lean in with some bravery. Framing it up, and then I'm going to pass it over. Our streets are filled with anguish right now, and the sounds of the revolution. The lynching of George Floyd untethered the freedom fighters and the peacemakers from the confines of a pandemic and into the streets again. For many non-Black, non-Indigenous folk, white sisters and brothers in particular, his execution was the moment that encouraged many of you to say something for the first time. But for others of you, it's the thing that's actually propelling you into the streets. And so you're showing up and you're pensive and you're nervous and you're not really sure what to do. The choreography is unfamiliar. And so you observe and you take pictures and you write about it. Good. But here's the thing. Protests are not meant to be observed nor consumed. Protest is holy work. It's an awakening to what's real. It's an awakening to what's unjust and to what's broken all around us. It's a tool of the restorative revolution that's actually meant to disrupt the pseudo peace of the status quo that is crushing Black and brown bodies, not only in our country, but around the world. And so the insurgence of wide-eyed, non-Black and non-Indigenous protesters into the streets is good news, but it's why this conversation is happening. We have a role to play, and it's time we learn exactly how to play it. And so, in my opinion, there are no two better guides, mentors, teachers, trainers for protest than Linda Sarsour and Ben McBride. And I'm going to turn it over to them in a second, just for a moment to identify and locate themselves. But before I do, I want the two of you to know that you are two of the freedom fighters, the revolutionaries, the everyday peacemakers, the prophets of the revolution that are shaping who I'm becoming. I'm learning from you. Your analysis is poignant. Your challenge is disruptive. Your lives are fueled by your faith. Your message is actually the embodiment of the costly love that you guys live on a day-to-day basis. You are integrous. And I am learning. I'm humbled to call you friends. I'm humbled to stand with you. I'm humbled to fight with you. I'm humbled to conspire with you. So thank you for taking a moment off the streets to get in on this conversation. And so Linda and Ben, why don't you identify yourselves and locate yourself a little bit?
Ben, come on. Go ahead.
All right. What's up, y'all? This is Ben McBride. I am a native of San Francisco, California. I'm a refugee in Oakland because you can't be Black and be in San Francisco anymore, but that's a whole nother Zoom and conversation. I am engaged and have been for some time at the end of the day, trying to figure out how do we ensure that Black folks and all people can live free from the oppression and violence that comes from this racist empire that we call America. I'm a person of faith. I'm a dude that has followed the Jesus way. I'm a guy that is pastored. I'm a guy that is situated myself at the intersection of gun violence and police violence, and tried to do work to also situate myself in the context of thinking about how do we bridge relationally with different groups of people, because I believe at the end of the day that there really is only one race, which is the human race, but we are living in a world whereby particularly racist white men and European colonizers have sought to create a world that has diminished the divine and diminished the dignity of people across difference. And so my work every day is really centered around not just trying to do things, but trying to become a different version of myself and to seek to cause our cities, our states, and our countries to become different versions of themselves. I organize with PICO and Faith in Action and Live Free, but at the end of the day, I organize on the streets. I organize with people named Pookie and Ray Ray. I organize with people. I live on the block where people are still shooting. I get down with the people in the pain because at the end of the day, they are me and I am them. The last thing I just would say, maybe in just opening this up, because I want to hear Linda spit some fire, because, you know, Linda's got that New York, you know, kind of, I can't remember what borough she's from, but I'm pretty sure she's going to credential that too. But she's got that fire. But the thing I would say is I think it's important at the front of this conversation for us to recognize that this conversation and this moment should be disrupting your orientation and your existing narrative and story around what this country is. Black people are in the streets and have been in the streets for 400 years because we are clear who this country is. This country is not, you know, for those who are coming from a orientation of faith and read the Christian Bible and read it in a Christian way. This nation is not the Hebrews in the story. This nation is Babylon. And you need to understand who this nation is in such a way in that story to recognize that this nation is not the victim of oppression. This nation is the oppressor creating victims. And so we have to have that orientation in this moment and recognize that systemic racism and structural racism and anti-Blackness is as American in this country as apple pie. The only difference is in America, Black people are the apples because we have been cut, because we have been sliced, because we have been cooked, and we have been served up. And currently the saucer has just been the knee of a police officer, or has been the bullets inside the body of Breonna Taylor, and more recently, the pepper spray of our dear brother that was incarcerated. So what we are seeing right now in this country is not a symptom of a bad of America. It is America. And so I think our call has to be, what does it mean for us to get into the streets, to disrupt this unrighteous empire and create something that we all can belong to? I'm excited to join and be a part of the conversation.
Thanks, Ben.
Woo! That's right, Rev. I am very honored and humbled to just be on this platform, especially with you, Ben, and all the work that you have done with my brother Mike, and your commitment and integrity and principles and values, and never forgetting about the people who need you the most. Thank you, Jer, for inviting us here to talk directly to folks. We are witnessing history right now. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, you know, I also, as you can tell, am not Black, but I'm also not white. And I feel like I have this role to play in the movement. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, a role to bridge the gap between non-Black people in America and white people, and of course, Black people. And I come to this work from a quote that I heard over 20 years ago from an Aboriginal woman in Australia named Leela Watson. And she said, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. As a Palestinian American, as a daughter of people, of a mother and father, of grandparents and great-grandparents who have lived under military occupation, who have been colonized, I too share the blood of an oppressed people. And that blood in my bones is what brings me to the movement for Black lives. It is what brings me to the movement in America for the sanctity of Black life. Because if Black people are not free in America, no one will be free. Not only will I not be free as a Muslim American, as an Arab American, as a Palestinian American, the Palestinian people in Palestine will not be free without the freedom of Black people. So I see our struggles intertwined. So I am committed, and it does not take away from the struggle of the Palestinian people for me to say that I am going to commit every fiber of my body to Black people, because when Black people are free, my people will be free. I am a Palestinian American activist and organizer, born and raised in Brooklyn, which is one of my most important credentials. The importance of being from Brooklyn brings a skill to the table that is very important for all of us to have in the movements that we're a part of and in the communities that we come from. We are truth tellers. We don't have filters. We don't have time to figure out how to frame and reframe things to make people feel comfortable. Brooklyn folks, we are uncomfortable leaders. We set the truth on the table, and it is up to you to accept or not accept the truth. But when you don't accept the truth, you become complicit to the very violence and injustice that you claim to be fighting against. I have been a protester for the past 20 years. I have been on the front lines for the past 20 years. I don't need anyone to pat me on the back for it. I made a decision. I chose not to be a bystander, and which is why we are all here today. And I wrote a book about it. And the reason why I wrote that book is not because I wanted to write a book, not because I have time to write a book. I'd rather be on the front lines instead of having to sit for 2.5 years to figure out how to write a book about it. But it was an opportunity to call people in and to say that there's nothing, maybe there is something extraordinary about Ben McBride, but there is nothing extraordinary about me. I'm a mama. I have kids like a lot of many people do have. I have responsibilities. I have laundry to do. I have bills to pay. I got rent to pay. I got the same responsibilities that everybody else have. I have dreams and aspirations. I dream one day that I'm going to be a homeowner and give my children a place to live that is with dignity. I have the same aspirations that you have. But there came a time for me in the post 9/11 era, after I saw the capability of what the US government can do to Muslims, and then understanding historical context that this government has done this to indigenous and Black people for centuries. I came to the realization, what the hell was I thinking that I thought as a Muslim that I can fight back against the empire when the people who've been fighting the empire for 400 years have not won? How naive of me to think that as a Muslim, I can beat the empire just as a Muslim or within my own Muslim American community. So that is why I'm a member of this movement, not only as an ally, but as many people know, and this is a point of education in our movements, I'm a Muslim. And 1/3 of Muslim Americans in this country are African American. So my community, When I fight and I stand on the street and I say Black Life Matters, I also mean Black Muslim Lives Matter. And so those are my sisters and brothers too that I have and march for first and foremost. And so we're bringing you here today and to have this honest conversation about protest and what it means to show up in a way that is contributory, in a way that is productive for those that are on the front lines, in a way that does not harm people on the front lines, and in a way that does not center you on the front lines, but makes you feel like you play an important role to move this revolution forward. As Ben said, we cannot do this alone. Black people will not win alone in America. Muslims will not win alone. Refugees will not win alone. Undocumented people will not win alone. We can only win together. And sometimes that means that each of us is going to have to sacrifice something. For me, I have made a commitment. I have had the hard conversation that I'm sure Mike has had with his family as well. Some of us might not make it. And that's just the reality of history. And that is the commitment that I've made to this movement. I am willing to die, like literally die. I'm willing to jump in front of a bullet to protect somebody, to protect the sanctity of Black life in America, to ensure that those sacrifices do not go in vain, just like the sacrifices of those that came before us has not been in vain. So again, I'm honored to be here and honored to teach, and also honored to learn, and especially from Ben.
That's amazing. Thank you, you guys. She mentioned this book, and we're going to mention it again at the end. We're not here to be bystanders. I know that there are avid readers listening in on this conversation. And for many of you, your next step is to do some reading. Oftentimes that reading has to take the shape of listening in on perspectives that are not your own. So for a moment, put a pause on reading White Ladies and the things that they're writing, and maybe start reading something like this if you want to understand the shaping of a revolutionary, the shaping of a protester, an everyday person who's showing up because her faith and her humanity require it. So again, get this book. Link is in the comment thread. I want you guys to dive right in there. Linda, I think you hooked us up really well. There is something happening in the streets right now that is both familiar and different. I wonder how you guys are analyzing that. Because I think the similarity and the difference is the reason we're having the conversation we're having right now with non-Black, non-Indigenous folk who are waking up to the game, right? So offer your analysis, and then let's dive right into like, what do we need to know in terms of how we protest well?
So Ben, why don't you start with your analysis, and then I can go into tangible, like protest mode. Okay,
cool. Yeah, so I mean, I think we have not had a moment like this in probably a little bit over 50 years. I think his history would say that the moment most like this would be probably 1968, when you had the convergence of both Black uprisings happening in cities across the country, from New York to Boston to DC to Detroit to Cincinnati to Los Angeles, right? You had uprising happening across the country. You had the emergence of the Black Power movement. You had Dr. King, who had just been assassinated. You had Bobby Kennedy, who had just been assassinated. You were just kind of on the heels now of the farm workers, the rising of the farm workers movement. And you had the anti-war movement beginning to come as the empire of the United States was moving into Vietnam. And you had this real convergence of both this deep kind of analysis that the way in which we have been going to try to resolve the problems in this country is not working. And you had a mass mobilization and uprisings that were happening across the country where the city was literally on fire. The cities were on fire. They were burning. There was a level of uncertainty that was living in the American consciousness around where do we go, where we're in war abroad and we are on fire domestically. And people were seeking to make meaning of it. I think one of the unfortunate things that happened in that moment is both white racist folks on the right and white racist folks on the left, and too many times silent white folks on the left, sought a strong man in Richard Nixon to try to assuage the kind of white fragility and nervousness that they had, and the fear, frankly, that they have and still have of Black rage. And because of that, they decided to go with Nixon, who enacted and worked a system of creating a new, more palatable anti-Black oppressive system of mass incarceration, and authored what ultimately Reagan kept going, which totally destroyed and dilapidated Black communities over the next 20 to 30 years, simply because white folks in 1968 could not make an analysis around what was happening in the streets. They loved the 1963 Dr. King, who talked about a dream, and yet they disappeared the line in the dream speech where he talked about the horrors of police brutality that the blacks were experiencing. They loved the Dr. King, who called for people to come to Selma and march for voting rights, but they did not want to hear the Dr. King in 1967, who said, "I fear that my dream has turned into a nightmare." They didn't listen to the Dr. King of 1967, who told Harry Belafonte, "I fear that I am integrating my people into a burning house." Dr. King had an analysis near the end of his life that the orientation of simply trying to come into cultural relationship with a strong policy analysis on the side, that was getting us where we needed to get. And when he really began to go after America in the way around after the empire, they shot his face off. And I think it's important for us to know that. When Dr. King decided to situate himself against the racism and the hyper-militaristic empire of this country, they blew his head off outside his hotel room, and the country went on fire, and white folks chose to put Nixon in office. That ultimately led to decades of Black oppression. I believe we are in this same moment right now with a convergence of movements. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a kind of global psychic injury for people being shut up in their homes. For the first time, many white people feeling how Black people have felt for 400 years, scared to go outside. That what you felt for germs, we have felt because of being in America. And so people have been carrying that. I don't think also that we can deny what happened both with the movement that rose out of New York that Linda and others were a part of when they choked out our brother Eric Gardner, that came a few months before the Ferguson uprising, where we had young Black people who were tatted and proud that got in the streets, took their shirts off and said, "We are not afraid of the United States government and we're ready to die." That uprising began to launch a Black Lives Matter movement across the country. And 6 years later, we are inheriting the legacies of this building movement and anxiety that has now collided with this COVID-19 pandemic and an emerging generations of white young people and young people of color who are not Black, who are aligning themselves with Black people to say that we do not want to live in an anti-Black world. We want to live in a new world. The challenge of this moment is that America has never lived in a world except an anti-Black world. And so right now we're in this moment where we are resisting what is, while we also are seeking to try to create imagination of what must be. And so I think the energy that's in the streets is a deep dissatisfaction. It is a critique of the country, and it is also a generational critique of X generation and baby boomers, and dare I say some millennials who have sought incremental change over the course of time. And now we have these teenagers and folks in their 20s that are saying Black Lives Matter, and if you will not listen, we are willing to let this country burn to the ground and this so-called democracy finally be revealed for what it is, a white, racist, oppressive system that crushes Black people and others. And so that's what's in the streets. And I think what is upon us in this moment is to think about not how do we control that very powerful witness that is happening, but how do we turn our ear to hear the prophetic message that's coming to all of us.
It's hard to follow that, Ben. I think, I was in Minneapolis for a few days. And in fact, the way that I got to Minneapolis is actually, I was in Louisville, Kentucky right before that with the family of Breonna Taylor and the family of Kenny Walker. And we also drove an hour and a half from Louisville to Indianapolis to meet the family of a young man named Mikhail Rose, who was one of 3 people killed by the Indianapolis Police Department in a matter of 24 hours. So 2 young Black men were murdered in separate incidents. And one of the victims was a pregnant woman who was hit by a off-duty Indianapolis police officer who died, her and her baby. And so what I want people to be rooted in this moment is that while we can bring up Oscar Grant and we can bring up Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis and we can bring up Ayanna Stanley Jones and Renisha McBride and Rakia Boyd and so many, Amadou Diallo, Abner Louima, Rodney. I mean, I could sit here for the fact that I even know these names off the top of my head is a problem, because there are just too many of them. But what the stories I'm sharing with you are people who have been murdered just within the last few weeks, and all of them being Black people. Jamel Floyd, Jerry, you brought that up. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I was out yesterday with the Jamel Floyd family outside of MDC Brooklyn, a man who was in a low security facility, who was about to be released in the next 30 days to be reunited with his family. His daughter was waiting for him to come and celebrate her 14th birthday, was pepper sprayed to death in his cell when he was not a harm to any other inmates. So not only is it about the lives being lost, but if tear gas has the potential to kill someone, the fact that the US government, including police departments and the National Guards, are willing to use it against peaceful protests, then you know that the government, by any means necessary, will do what they can to suppress protesters on the street. And I also want to caution people, and I've seen this from white folks and non-Black people who are posting imagery. This is how we get into what not to do. Posting imagery like photos of Dr. King marching arm in arm with white allies. There were always white allies in the movement. There were always Jewish allies that were in the civil rights movement. But to try to placate or chastise or patronize young people on the street by telling me that Dr. Martin Luther King was nonviolent is actually inaccurate. In fact, Dr. Martin Luther King, when promoting nonviolence, he was very specific that nonviolence was not passive. And while the civil rights movement overall was a nonviolent movement, what people don't want to say is that it was always met with violence. And even in the story of Selma, when we talk about Selma, we have to focus on what actually happened that day. And we don't always mention Bloody Sunday. Those nonviolent people that we talk about knew that Bull Connor was waiting for them on the other side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And those Black people and white allies said, yes, we know that Bull Connor is waiting for us on the other side of the bridge, and we are willing to go anyway. Now we are in a moment where we have Edmund Pettus bridges in Minneapolis, in New York, in Oakland, in LA, in Houston, in Dallas, in Atlanta, and all over the country. And the people on the streets are saying, we know we're going to meet Bull Connor, which are police chiefs and police officers, the National Guards, governors and mayors and elected officials and all the powers to be police union leaders. We know those Bull Connors exist. What's happening on the street is enough is enough. And this time we mean it, and we're ready to go up against Bull Connor. Bull Connor can mace us, he can tear gas us, he can shoot us with rubber bullets, and we're gonna take it because we know that somebody and some people are gonna have to sacrifice in order for there to be transformative change. Jared, what we're experiencing right now is not a spectator sport. And this is what brings me to the protest movement. Protests are not for people to show up to say that we are just here to bear witness to what is happening in those protests. Being a protester is an active decision that you made. And that means that there are things that we need to be aware of as we are in those protest space. Our role as white folks and role as non-Black people of color and non-Indigenous people is to ensure that we are protecting frontline people who are often from the most marginalized communities. And I'm going to give you a very specific visual example. When I was in Minneapolis, we were protesting outside the home of County Attorney Mike Freeman. And it was a beautiful protest. Peaceful, people were sharing stories, families were there, people were sitting on Mike Freeman's lawn. There were hundreds of people, literally had occupied his entire street. The neighbors were good. There was very low police presence, which was something that was asked of from the local organizers. This is before it got really heated up in the Minneapolis area. There was a moment where a white man came, and we have a lot of these kinds of folks that come to the protests. And this was a white man who stood outside of Mike Freeman's home, and all of a sudden a Black woman was on the mic and he started disrupting. And he said, Mike Freeman is my friend. And Mike Freeman always does the right thing. And I'm not going to allow you to stand here in front of my friend's house. And I'm going to defend my friend and blah, blah, blah. And and the Black people do this. And you go, why don't you go to, I don't know what part of Minneapolis where the Black people kill the Black people and all this kind of stuff. You know, I stood there for a second and I looked around, and about 3 minutes into this tirade that this white man did, who was very outraged, all of a sudden I see two young Black men, 20, maybe 22 years old, walk up to the white man and try to negotiate with the white man to say to him, this is not the space for you. We're going to ask you to leave this space. And in that moment, Jer, what came to me was, and I looked around and there were white men at the protest, there were white women at the protest, and I said to myself, if at any moment this white man felt the need to be physical with these Black men who were peacefully negotiating with him to be removed from the space, and they somehow defended themselves against the violence that this white man may commit against them, the police could have murdered another 2 black men to defend this white man that was the one being the provocateur and the agitator in that space. And the reason why I bring that as an example is that when you are at a protest and you see agitation as a white person from another white person, it is your role, it is your responsibility, not the responsibility of people of color or black people, to be the ones to put their bodies in between this white man, oftentimes, who is engaging in agitation of protesters. It is your job to go, as they say in the movement, to get your cousin, to surround that person and say, let us have a conversation with you. We want to know where you're coming from. Why are you here being aggressive toward these people? To make sure it is clear to this white man who looks like you, who may be from your communities, that you are with these people and that you are with the people standing for justice. And it is then your job to find the different tactics to de-escalate those provocateurs that come to our movement spaces. Your job also and role as someone who comes to a movement space or a protest is to find where your support is needed. Oftentimes I will see Black people or people of color giving out water to protesters, maybe helping with triage, washing people's eyes out from tear gas. And yes, there has been evolution, and now we are absolutely seeing more white folks that are taking on those roles, and we are asking you to join those folks. So when you come to a protest, if you see triage stations, if you see people that are engaging in acts of service, providing snacks and sustainability, particularly to those who are engaging in Occupy type tactics, which means people who stay multiple hours outside or maybe even days outside a police station or in front of a federal building or many other places, as you've seen happen in places like Florida when the Dream Defenders took over the Capitol building for 30 days. These are actions that are happening across the country. And it is a place for white folks to say, where can I be helpful? Where can I show up? And not only just at the protest, Jer, you know, we think about protests and we think that protests are these very decentralized, you know, kind of ad hoc. And oftentimes they are, and we want them to be decentralized. What is beautiful about the moment we're in, Jer, is it is not just there's a Dr. Martin Luther King. There are Sojourner Truths, and there are Dr. Martin Luther Kings, and there are Malcolm X's all across this country in local grassroots communities, and they are our leaders. And so our role in the movement is to find ways to sustain these leaders. And what that means, Jer, is that we also, not only as participants of protest, but also funders of protest. Yep. And one of the things that often happens with white donors, and I'm highly recommending a resource to you all as Reverend Ben was talking about kind of the later life of Dr. Martin Luther King, in particular the last 18 months before he was assassinated by what they call those, you know, I would say when people said white people, by probably some of the white people that at one point might have agreed with him, but then he started crossing the line for them. There is a documentary that I watched actually on YouTube. It's free. You don't have to buy it. It's accessible. It's called King in the Wilderness. And what it does is it documents Dr. Martin Luther King's life in the last 18 months of his life. In the last 18 months where he himself was becoming evolutionary and having his own awakening, even as a revolutionary himself. You know, it was the moment when he realized, wait a minute, militarism is something that I need to talk about. That why would I be silent about a war that my country is going to sending Black soldiers to, when we're trying to, you know, go kill brown people, when we as Black people, and I don't mean we as me, but Black people were saying at the time, we can't get free. Black people weren't able to get free in America. And we're over here sending Black people to free other Americans, right? Like this, there was a moment where Dr. King was like, this is not okay. Militarism and racism and kind of connecting and being that intersectional leader. One thing that I found about white folks in particular, even, you know, neoliberal and some of the, you know, center left white folks, is that they get really uncomfortable when we become intersectional. And I'll give you an example. The Women's March is a great example of that. The Women's March was on the precipice of being one of the largest mass protest movements in America. The minute the Women's March started saying Black Lives Matter, the minute the Women's March started saying that criminal justice reform, you cannot talk about criminal justice reform without talking about economic justice and gender justice and environmental justice. When the Women's March started saying, if we are a protest movement, and that is what we are going to claim to be, then we must support boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which was the tactics of the civil rights movement. How can you elevate Dr. Martin Luther King and then support legislation now in 2020 that says boycotts and divestments of countries who engage in human rights violations is something that you don't support? It's hypocritical. It doesn't align. And so we started making a lot of white women really uncomfortable. And they wanted just to be pink pussy hats and be like, Trump is bad, Trump is bad. One of the philosophies that we organize, or the ideologies of organizing, we don't come to the movement just as people who are outraged. We come with a trained ideology. I am trained in Kingian nonviolence, and there are 6 principles of nonviolence that I will not go through today because they are also very nuanced and we need to understand them. And so I highly recommend that you Google the 6 principles of nonviolence, which are give you the core or the foundation of how to show up in our movement spaces. But one of the most important principles of Kingian nonviolence, Jer, is this. We attack the forces of evil, but we do not attack the people doing evil. And let me explain what that means.
Good.
In the post-2016 election, one of the reasons we saw this mass uprising and mass people in the street is that all of a sudden white people, and in particular white women, who were so outraged, all of a sudden they were like, oh my God, racism and xenophobia and sexism and misogyny. It was almost like an introduction, like Donald Trump introduced that to everyone. And Black people and undocumented folks and other marginalized people were like, where have you been? These are the exact forces of evil that we have been fighting for, some in this country for centuries and others for decades. And the reason why that principle is important is that when your fight stops at a district attorney, when your fight stops at one police officer, when your fight stops at the doorsteps of Donald Trump, right? You are not in fact being contributory or being productive in the movements we're a part of, because our ills did not start with Donald Trump. And so what we need white folks to understand is that we need you to commit not to ousting Donald Trump in 2020. That is part of it. But we need you to be committed to the long-term fight that is not a sprint, but a marathon of eradicating racism and anti-Black racism and xenophobia and misogyny and patriarchy and all of the ills, ableism and, anti-Semitism and all the ills that different communities have been fighting separately for a really long time. Yeah. And the last thing that I'll also, ask, and this is like a very small, tangible thing. Even when we think about the movement that Dr. Martin Luther King and of course many others were a part of, and including many strong Black women who were a part of that movement, I always remember the conversation about funding and funders. Dr. Martin Luther King did have a lot of white funders. That's just the bottom line. Just as many leaders in the communities that we come from do get a lot of support from white progressives and white folks that are committed to this cause. And what I'm asking white people in this moment to do is to be risky, to be risk averse. Listen, I just want you to imagine yourself that you were living 50 years ago and you were putting your money on Malcolm X. Like, there were white people that are like, we don't mess with Malcolm X, like, because Malcolm X says stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable. Right now, we have to be sophisticated, and we have to also understand that it's not about how you feel, right? It's about winning for the most marginalized people. So what I'm asking you to commit yourself as you're part of this protest movement is to the understanding that unity is not uniformity. That Dr. Ben McBride is gonna sometimes say things and you're gonna be like, whoa, that's spicy, I don't know. But guess what? Dr. Ben McBride gets to be spicy because he's a Black man in America and he's allowed to be that. He's going to be able to say things that are just not gonna make you feel comfortable. I'm gonna say things that make you feel uncomfortable. I have political views that you may not agree with. But if you believe in the sanctity of Black life, if you believe in the sustainability of mass uprising and organizing and protesting, and you know who the people in our country are who are capable of that organizing, then put for 1 second your one disagreement with me, your one disagreement with Ben, your one disagreement with Tamika Mallory, your one disagreement with this leader to the side, because it doesn't actually matter in this moment, because people are literally dead bodies are on the streets of our community. So what I'm asking for folks is to be agile, is to be flexible, is to not center how you feel in this moment, but remembering that our role is to uplift the most heartbroken, the most pained people, the most traumatized people in our country. And I promise you, when we get to the place when the least of us is above us, we will all be lifted. And so when you're giving a donation to an organization, your Cash App, you know, I'm actually asking people, give to organizers directly. Ask a local organizer in your community, what's your Cash App? What's your Venmo? What's your Zelle? Send them $50, send them $100. Go buy your kids dinner on me. Go get daycare for your baby because I know you want to be on the streets. It's not always about this institutional nonprofit industrial complex that also is a figment of white supremacy. It makes us compete. I got to compete against Dr. Ben for money. He got to compete against me. We have plenty of resources, plenty of white people and non-Black people of color who have the resources to give across the movement. One last thing I'll say about that, because this is important, because freedom is not free in America, Jared. It's really not. These protests are not free. It costs people resources. People have to sacrifice to organize and be in the streets. Please don't ask people for your tax deduction letter. Like this movement will not have bookkeepers. We do not have bookkeepers in this movement. Because guess where the bookkeepers are? The bookkeepers are also outside on the street with us. You know where our administrative assistants are? They're in the street making sure we have the supplies that we need. They're out there buying the lights for when it's dark outside. They're making sure we have the granola bars and the water bottles. They're making sure that we have places to sleep and coordinating with churches and coordinating with people. That's what they're doing. So if you're sending me $50 or even $5,000 and you're waiting for me to send you a flowery letter about how I can't do this work without you, you're just not going to get it. And you're going to have to be okay with that, because the people who would be sending you that letter are also committed to the struggle, and they are on the streets with us, unless you want to be the people that want to do the bookkeeping, and nobody likes to do bookkeeping. So I'll stop there.
Let me add just a couple things to what Linda was saying. I told y'all she was going to bring that fire. So let me just add a couple more things on there for folks, particularly as you're thinking about how it is that you show up when you're out in a protest. You know, there's a Facebook Live that me and my brother did. I like to call him the famous McBride. My brother Mike, it's the famous McBride. Whenever y'all see him, tell him you're the famous McBride, right? My brother Mike, he and I both did a Facebook Live the other day. You can find that on my Facebook page, and we talked about some of this protest work. I want to say to white people, when you are out in a protest, a couple things you need to realize. Number one, there are multiple lanes and multiple expressions of protest. You do not need to come out to a protest about police violence to police the protest. That is not your job. That is not your role. There's different lanes for different people. So if you're out there and some people are deciding that they're going to pick up a rock and throw a rock, and people say, well, what do I do if that happens? You know what I say? Don't throw a rock. You don't need to try to control the person that's going to throw a rock. You just don't throw a rock. That's what you can do. You can manage yourself, and then you can learn how to listen to some of the people who are enraged and angry, and learn how to get in relationship with them. Now, there's the other thing that we need white people to understand. Don't believe the hype, because it's already been proven. We got a lot of white supremacist organizations that try to infiltrate and take advantage of our righteous protests in the streets and come and try to create a whole lot of mass violence in the name of a lot of our righteous work that is happening. And so if a Black person is pissed off at the violence that they have experienced towards the state, and they want to express it in some way that may not necessarily be how I express it, I am not there to try to police them. But these white supremacists who show up, and or some of the white young people from your community who are also hurting, who need to be reached out to, who need a conversation. We have a line that we said, white people, come get your kids. Come outside and listen to your white young people who are enraged and who are upset. Come and wrap your arms around them. Come and be a support for them. Don't just sit on the sidelines, and don't just be a bystander. We are not here to be bystanders. We are here to engage. So come out and get engaged with the people that are in the streets. Love and support folks. Talk with people, but understand when you come out to the protest, you are there to participate, to express your rage, to bear witness to what is happening, to bear witness to the deep pain of what's happening, but do not come out to police. And the other thing I want to say, and this ain't about the protest, but it's about social media. White folks, you are not on social media as it relates to the movement to police the speech and the lament of Black people and people of color who have been disenfranchised by this white racist system. You need to understand that your role in this moment is to listen and to follow the leadership of Black people, and particularly as it relates to other issues, people of color. The only reason we got rid of slavery is because white people and non-Black people of color were willing to follow the leadership of Black women who built the Underground Railroad and led our people to freedom. They followed their leadership. They didn't try to control their leadership. They followed their leadership. They funded their leadership. So in this same freedom moment, you want to ask, what can I do? And I've heard white people say to me before, well, I don't want to just be a cash register. You put that frame on yourself. If you have extra resources, you need to recognize that one of the reasons you have extra resources financially is because of a white supremacist system that affords that to you. So while we are still working on our reparations, because Black people, we still ain't got our 40 acres and a mule, while we're waiting on reparations, find a way to use some of the extra resources you have. Give up that double frappuccino latte that you have 3-4 times a week, because it's bad for your heart and for your weight anyway. Take that money and reinvest it into a liberation movement so you can help save a Black person's life. Let us not be the people who only protest when we see the public lynchings of Black people. Let us be the kind of people that leverage our time and resources, come out to the protest, find out what people need. Linda gave excellent points that I'm hoping y'all have captured and you take as next steps to get involved.
Mm-hmm. This is good. I want to go ahead.
Just one quick thing. This is actually very important, and Dr. Ben reminded me of this. You know, Malcolm X actually said this, and I think that he was just such a prophetic person, because I actually can imagine him standing here today and saying exactly word for word what he said over 50 years ago, and we would be shaking our heads like, oh my God, this is exactly what's happening now. Malcolm X said, the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. Mm-hmm. And we watch that in real time in movement after movement after movement. And one of the things I will call white people and non-Black people of color to is something, the most important thing. Coming to a protest is important, Jared. We need that solidarity. We need to show that this is an intergenerational, multiracial, movement, that we're all standing in this together. But the real work happens in our communities. It doesn't take much courage to come to a protest to say Black life matters. What really takes courage is going back to our father, our grandfather, our uncle, our cousin, our mom, and having these kinds of conversations and trying to root the very ills that we are fighting against in the very communities that we come from. As non-Black people of color, we all come from communities where we've learned anti-Blackness, and we have to unlearn anti-Blackness. And that's going to require some of us who have been on the journey of unlearning anti-Blackness to then teach those in our families. And the sacrifice I'm talking about is not always the sacrifice of death or sacrifice of life, to be in the movement and potentially be assassinated. I'm talking about the sacrifice. Sometimes we're going to have to sacrifice relationships. Sometimes we're going to have to say, oh, is that Thanksgiving dinner happening at my racist uncle's house this year? I'm not going, because I need to send a message that I will no longer be a bystander to the racists that are within my own family, and that we're going to have those, meet people where they're at. For example, when I have these conversations in my own Arab American community about any Black man or woman who's killed at the hands of police, a question that often gets asked, and thank God there's been some evolution around this over the last 6 years. I remember 6 years ago, a Black man gets killed by police, and Arab Americans will look at me and say, but what did he do before that? Like, what's the story? And I would immediately answer by saying, it doesn't actually matter what he did. He could have robbed the store. He could have took a cigarillo. He could have shoplifted. He could have had an argument with a store owner. He could have kicked the car. He could have done whole lot of things, right? But at no point is there ever a justification for murder. And that is like the bottom line here. So when you hear people also talking about, conversation that I've had in my family and I've seen on social media, particularly by white folks, is the response of, well, in Chicago, last 2 weekends ago and on Memorial Day, 39 people got shot in the south side of Chicago, without ever once us as non-Black people and white people mentioning that there are brave Black-led organizations and violence interrupters in every corner of this country who literally, are on the streets of Chicago and Baltimore and Brooklyn and Jamaica, Queens and Oakland, who literally are pulling guns out of the hands of young Black and brown people. And that conversation is not being had. We are not investing in gun violence prevention from the perspective of communities of color. You will drop $1 million on Moms Demand Action. You will drop $1 million on, you know, some of these larger organizations. You don't get me started. And a lot of white people will say, I gave $100,000 to March for Our Lives. I gave $1 million to this organization. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but did you give $1 million to Erica Ford in Jamaica, Queens? Did you give money to Marcus in the South Side of Chicago, who's literally a violence interrupter and puts his own heart in literally in the ways of gun violence in his own community? So that's the whole conversation that we as non-Black people of color said, don't tell me about black on black crime, because actually Black people are doing more to address Black on Black crime than white people are doing to address white on white crime. So these are the kinds of hard conversations that we also need to be having in the movement. And the last thing that I'll say very quickly, because I've been, you know, all of us have been in this situation. What I need white folks who are just like you said, Jared, the folks watching are like, I'm in it, ready to go. Tell me what I need to do right now. The most important thing that I need from you is to focus. Focus is important. One of the things that happens to us is we get distracted very often in the movement. And we have right-wing media, we have neoliberals, we have both Democrats and Republicans who are not on our side. We have people who historically are part of lineages of people who want to delegitimize the leaders in our movement, who will say, but what about when Dr. Ben 10 years ago said that? Or what about this about Dr. Ben? Linda, you know, is anti-Israel, or what about that? Those things you have to say, listen, in this moment, none of these people are prophets. None of these people are perfect leaders. None of these people are going to be people we will wholeheartedly agree with. But what you cannot deny about the leadership that is in the streets right now is they are principled, they have integrity, and guess what? They are willing to sacrifice for the people that they love in our communities. And what we should be all aspiring to is to be just like those very people on the front lines. And ask yourself, what are you willing to die? What are you willing to sacrifice for your children, for your white children, for your white mamas and grandmothers, for your white spouse, for your white partner? Me, I am willing to sacrifice my life so that my Muslim children could live in a country alongside Black children and Indigenous children and Latinx children and white children with dignity and respect, where we can all thrive. And just one extra layer of conversation, and this is just to spark your internal. We often chastise communities. I saw this conversation before. What are Black people doing? Like, you know, you got to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Look at this Harvard grad Black person. Look at this Ivy League, you know, look at Bakari Sailors, and look at, you know, Dr. McBride, and look at this one and that one. People don't want to have the real conversation. The fact that white folks still till today are okay with the fact that tax revenue is what funds public school districts. The fact that Black children and children of color have to go to poor working class school districts where they have less curriculum, less programs, less everything, because they're poor. That is the bottom line. If you live in a white rich neighborhood, based on your income and the taxes that you pay, a portion of your tax revenue goes back to your school district. But what if you're a community of housing projects? What if you're a poor community? Is it your fault that I don't have the same income as someone who's making six figures or making $1 million or $2 million? So when we look at Black children and we look at the statistics of dropouts, or we look at any of those statistics that white people in particular use against people of color, ask yourself not why did those kids drop out? Ask yourself, what is the root cause of the problem? And that is the word radical, Jer. Radical is a word that is used against communities, against leadership, that makes us, and that is used in the context of terrorism. It is used in a negative connotation. And I want everyone to know on the record here, I am a proud radical. I use that term to define myself, to define the people that I organize with, because radical has a very simple meaning. Radical is to get to the root of the problem. And in order for us not to fix, but to transform America, we got to get to the root of the problem. When we get to the root, we got to yank it out of the root, burn it all. And we got to plant something new that we are committed to. And you, Jer, you, Dr. Mike, we may not ever see the true fruits of our labor. None of the folks that are being trained right now to be good protesters and good collaborators and good accomplices, you may never see that transformed, reimagined America. But we have to all be committed to being at least part of planting those seeds, knowing that future generations are going to benefit from what we do and the decisions that we make today. And I hope that that decision is that you are not going to be a bystander in this moment.
Yeah. Let me, this is incredible. There's one more question I want to ask. I want to hit a couple of resources that I'm hearing you guys talk about. And then I want to come back because Linda, I'm hearing you say some really, really incredible things. I'm just even registering that for many non-Black, non-Indigenous folk on this call right now, we have been groomed to revere Dr. King and reject Malcolm, right? So like very, very few folk, white folk in particular that I know are as well-versed. Even if they are well-versed in Dr. King, they're certainly not as well-versed in what Malcolm X actually had to say and how he lived his life. And I think that that's actually evidence of the fact that we as white folk, as a white community, have actually been groomed to reject anything that feels uncomfortable to us. We're told he's an uncomfortable figure. And so then discomfort means that we reject it. We move away from it. And what you're inviting us to say is like, if you're going to be a part of the revolution, then you're going to have to figure out how to transcend or maybe even grow your capacity for discomfort. Because there's things that I'm going to say, there's things that you're going to say that's going to make you feel bad. Mm-hmm. And you got to have a little bit of shame resilience to be able to gird yourself up and continue on despite the fact that we might disagree about that thing. Ben, I want to come to you after I hit some of these resources, because you have had so much experience interacting with white folk and specifically white faith leaders who are we're in. And the moment you make us a little uncomfortable, we're out, nah. You know, and I want you to talk to us about like talk to us about it. You know, talk to me like I'm the person who starts to back away, because sometimes I do. Talk to me about it in a second. A couple of resources for those of us who are listening in. Number one, we are not here to be bystanders. Link is coming into the comment thread right now. Get this book. If you are inspired at all, like I know you are, agree with her or not, you're inspired by this woman. If you want to understand how to become somebody who is willing to give her life for the sake of the cause, this book tells the story of how, at least her story of how she got there. It's changing me. It will change you, no doubt. So pick up this book. There are two organizations I want to platform. Until Freedom. Linda, can you just hit real quick on Until Freedom what it is?
Listen, it's frontline organizers, lawyers, formerly incarcerated individuals, activists and organizers, like a clearinghouse of folks who are on the front lines trying to intersect our sectors together. We are campaign developers. We are people working with families. We do media advocacy. We know how to work the media and just really getting the support to frontline organizers as fast as possible. That's why I kept saying Cash App and Venmo. Like, yeah. I got no time to fill out no paperwork. So this is a group founded by a few folks, but one of them that you've seen recently in the media, who has been a spit and truth teller, our sojourner truth of this time, is a young woman named Tamika D. Mallory, who actually comes out of the anti-gun violence movement, a woman who lost her son's father to gun violence and had that inspire her to become a foot soldier in this movement, came out of the National Action Network. And I am proud as a non-Black person to follow the leadership of this Black woman. So Until Freedom, just to be clear, Jer, we are a C4 organization. We are a political advocacy organization. We do political lobbying as well. So we are not interested in people who just want to get tax deductions. You put your money on the movement and invest in us, and you will not get a tax deduction because we are a C4 entity.
Got it. Thanks. All those resources are in the comment thread right now. Follow and invest. And a quick word on Tamika. Many of you probably saw, I mean, her video went viral. It must have been from the Capitol. Hey, and where was that filmed at, Linda?
That was in Minneapolis.
In Minneapolis. That Tamika is the one who's literally saying that the Black community is in a state of emergency right now. So you've probably seen her. That's who she is if you're unfamiliar. Ben, can you platform Bring the Heat and what's going on and how we can get behind that?
Listen, there's been incredible work that's been happening for decades around thinking about, in different expressions, how do we fix policing? How do we reform policing? We are now taking up a movement and creating a platform, picking up some of the work that we've been doing since Ferguson, where we are going to work to dismantle the police state in the United States of America. And we are going to dismantle it by actually cutting it into slices. So Bring the Heat is now a national movement and platform by which we are going to dismantle the police state by focusing on the 4 divisions of policing: hiring, equipment, accountability, and training. HEAT, hiring, equipment, accountability, and training. We're going to bring the heat by doing a mass mobilization of getting people who have never organized before to begin to start organizing actively to defund these police departments and begin to erect a new public safety system that can actually deliver security for all of us as people. The current policing system that we have is a racist system. I don't care if you got family members that's in it, so do I. The system is a racist system that was initially slave catchers that had three main functions: chase down runaway slaves, organize terror so enslaved people wouldn't run away, and use excessive force to gain compliance. And what do police do now? They chase down black people, they organize terroristic activity to keep us messed up, and they use excessive force like the kind that killed George Floyd. So we are going to undo this system while building a new one. We can't have no system at all. So some people say, let's just abolish the police and have no system. That ain't gonna work. We gotta have a system. So we're going to defund this current system and erect a new system in its place that is gonna take work. So go to bringtheheat.info, bringtheheat.info. This is going to be an inter-organizational, inter-network organizing strategy. So you don't have to be in the PICO world. If your organization wants to be a part of it, your church, your congregation, your mosque, your temple, your crew on 76 and Bancroft, whatever it is, we're gonna list that. We're gonna have a place for people to lock in. You can go ahead and jump and do that. You already saw it in the comments, a place to tap in also to help support this Bring the Heat work exists as a part of our larger Live Free movement that we started 10 years ago to reduce gun violence and mass incarceration and voter suppression of Black people and to transform policing. You can also go to livefreeusa.org, tap in. We're working to get masks and resources, hand sanitizer, particularly to Black people who are dying disproportionately to this coronavirus. So there are a bunch of different ways for you to get locked in with the Mask for the People campaign, with our Live Free gun violence work, and bringtheheat.info. Let's all get deputized in this work. We got a lot of work to do, but we got a lot of people to do it. So let's all get dialed in.
That's right. And then there's three. Go ahead.
Sorry, Until Freedom, just so folks know, is obviously endorsing the Bring the Heat campaign and working directly with Mike and Ben on this. So we want to show you already just in this very small conversation, the type of cross-organizational and cross-leadership and collaboration that's happening.
Yeah, and then three quick ways to connect with Global Immersion. Number one, like this page and stay in the loop on follow-up resources and future resources that are coming your way. Number two, if you're in this place where you're recognizing, like, I have to grow my muscle and capacity for the restorative revolution as everyday peacemakers, text the word peace to the number 66866. Again, the word peace, P-E-A-C-E, to the number 66866, and that will get you linked in with us, and we'll get to move out some resources in your direction. The last thing is, if you are a non-Black, non-Indigenous leader and pastor on this call, we're putting together a 2-hour workshop for those of you who are waking up to the realities of systemic racism and are paralyzed by the task of guiding your people forward in the movement. June 17th is going to be that 2-hour virtual workshop from 10 to 12 PST. It's going to be open for 100 people. And so that link is showing up right now in the comment thread, as well. So there's some resources for you right now. Ben, were you about to jump in?
Yeah, just a couple more things I want to put for folks also. We all need entry points into this. When I talk about organizing, I talk about it as a freeway, and all of us need on-ramps. So some of this hot language that Linda's now named me Dr. Ben, so now I'm going to name her the Majestic Linda. So one of the things that the Majestic Linda has given us, she's spitting fire, I'm spitting fire, and sometimes you might not yet really be able to hold all this fire. Another resource I want to give you, otheringandbelonging.org. Dr. John Powell has a great entry place for you to begin to start understanding how anti-Blackness and anti-racism and belonging, and there's some great tools and language there. Another brilliant Black woman, Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt, wrote a book called Bias, which talks about the intersection of policing and race and bias. Get Dr. Jennifer's book. It's an incredible resource. And just as we were talking to y'all about that HEAT campaign, get your phone out again. Y'all can put this in the chat box. Text the word HEAT to 40649. Text the word HEAT to 40649 and follow the prompts. You can get signed up for this national movement to end the police state. And here's a little freebie. If you sign up over this next week, we're going to send you one of these t-shirts in the mail. You're going to get one of your Fire Fist t-shirts and we all going to get locked up and raise that. All right, I'm done with my plugs.
Amazing. Let me come to the question, this final question then, and both of you feel free to weigh in. White folk, we're waking up, we're entering in, we get discomfort or uncomfortable. We're actually groomed to understand discomfort as something is wrong. Now, in reality, when we're uncomfortable, it's actually a signal that something very right is happening, and transformation is just on the other side of it, right? But we bail too quickly because we've been programmed to think that discomfort is wrong. Most of us lean back. Ben, you have had so much experience with this. Why do we lean back, and what do you want to say to us in terms of, what do you want to say to us about it?
Let me say to all my white relatives across the country, because I have hung out with you in Oregon, I've hung out with you in Washington, I've hung out with you in the middle of the country and down in the South, and I've managed all of the questions of, hey Ben, explain that Trayvon Martin thing, and heard a lot of bizarre questions in and around this, and folks will lean in, but then you lean out. Here's what I need you to understand. If you are going to be part, and because you are part, because if you're on this call, you've already joined the movement. If you are going to be a part of this movement, it is going to hurt. The pain that you feel is not bad pain. It's actually good pain. That is actually the proof that you are beginning to develop muscles where you have been atrophied. And one of the things I would like to tell people is, if you have been sitting in a chair for too long, your feet go to sleep, your legs go to sleep. And when someone first brings you to your feet, it is uncomfortable because you are feeling the inactivity in your posture and you're feeling the pain in your body, and everything in your body tells you to sit back down. What we say to white pastors and white leaders is that the way you have been preaching in your church has been from a seated position. We need you to preach from your feet. We say to white folks that the way you have been listening to the story has been in a seated position, and we need you to listen and participate from your feet. Why? Because the seat you have been sitting in is a chair constructed by anti-Blackness, and that chair is literally been on the neck of Black people. Your comfort has become our oppression. And so if you love us, and if you say you love God, for those who are spiritual, then my scripture says, how can you say you love God and you hate your brother? If you love God, then we need you to get up out of the chair of convenience, get up out of the anti-Black structure that is choking the life of Black people every day, and manage the pain on your feet. I believe if you will have the courage to deal with some of that pain of you standing up, I believe that we will also then be able to stand up, and then we together can walk into a journey that we all can belong to. But the pain is good pain. The pain is good pain. I'm going to say it again. The pain is good pain. Don't retreat from the pain. Lean into the pain, and let's all get to freedom together.
Yeah, brother. Thank you. Linda, do you want a last word?
I like to get the Brooklyn folks like to get the last word. I will just concur everything that Ben has said right now. There's only two sides right now. And I will say this today on this, this June day in 2020, there are two sides. There's the right side and the wrong side. And we have to make the decision to be on the right side. There is no middle ground. There's two islands, and you got to choose which island, or you will literally drown in a sea of complicity if you choose not to be on the right side today. And I ask all of you to be agile, to be flexible, to sit in that discomfort, to not put the burden on people of color and Black people when it comes to the discomfort. The discomfort is an opportunity for you to ask yourself, why is it that you are uncomfortable with people explaining pain and trauma, and the consistency of this pain and trauma, that it's sometimes okay for us to feel uncomfortable, and only in discomfort do we in fact move. And as Dr. Ben said, when we are home and you are sleeping at night, when you are comfortable, you will sleep in the same position for the whole night. It is only when you are uncomfortable that you start moving around that night to find that place. And what Black people want is they want to find that comfortable place, that safe space, that place where they can not just survive in America, but to thrive. And remembering that our liberation as non-Black people in America is bound up with the liberation of Black people. So when Black people are free, Women are not going to have to fight for our reproductive rights. Immigrants are not going to have to fight for immigrant justice. Every community, LGBTQIA folks, we have centered every other community, but for some reason, when it's about Black people, people seem to not understand that that, in fact, is the central and core movement that we all need to be a part of. And I'll just end with this, because I'm just like I keep thinking about the tangible questions, Jared, that keep being asked of us. Don't be afraid of what you're hearing right now on the front lines. I want you to lean in and understand what those things are. Educate yourself, listen to organizers. And I'm happy, Jared, if there are other topics and things that people are coming to you with, I'm happy to have those very specific conversations. Yeah. One of the biggest asks right now of movement leaders across the country, both grassroots and national, is this: defund the police. And what white people see when we say defund the police is they think that they're going to wake up tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock and boom, police are going to disappear off the face of the earth. And it scares them, because white people are trained to believe that it is that police are the ones that keep them safe. And I just want to end by saying this as just something to take with you. When we say defund police, this is what we mean. And we know that when we talk to white people about this, they agree with us wholeheartedly. Defunding police means take the police out of the schools. When we say defund the police, we say take police out of addressing mental health crises. When we say defund police, we say take police out of addressing the homelessness crisis and putting in services and actual affordable housing or free housing for the homeless. So what we're saying is, instead of seeing police as the answer to every ill in this country, what if we found alternatives to policing in America that is constructive and productive and that is full of love and compassion and service? That is what the movement to defund police actually means. It is not criminals are going to be running around and rapists and murderers and white people are going to have to lock their doors and put up bars in front of their house. We want you to join us in the fight to defund police departments and to reinvest in communities and services and economic opportunities so that every American and every resident of our country can thrive in a safe society where we all feel safe and can live in dignity and safety and security all in the same way. So thank you, Jared. Thank you, Ben. You are always going to be Dr. Ben to me, whether you like it or not. And I appreciate you all for having us today.
Amazing. Love you both. Thank you so much for the time. Friends, here's the deal. We've listened, right? Now the question is, how are you going to allow yourself to be changed by what you've heard? How are you going to live, love, lead, and protest differently because of this hour spent? This moment was not a moment to consume. This was a moment to become transformed, because lives literally depend on it. So friends, gird up, get up on your feet, and we'll see you again really soon. Thanks for taking the time.